Welcome everyone to the China-US Women's Foundation Zoom interview with Desmond Wheatley, CEO of BEEM Global. We're so thrilled to welcome Desmond here. We're also thrilled to have Emma Fraser conduct the interview today. Emma was one of our summer interns with the CUSWF internship program, at which time we really focused on sustainability and agreed that this was going to be an issue that we would continue on into the fall because it concerns Gen Zers in particular, women, China, US. It really incorporates a lot of our interests and passions. And that's why we're so pleased that Desmond Wheatley, who has been a friend of ours for many years and who is a thought leader in this area, has agreed to be interviewed today. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for being with us. And Emma, I pass the mic over to you.
Thank you. So for anybody who doesn't know who Desmond Wheatley is, he joined BEEM as a consultant in 2010 when it was Envision Solar, and has served as the company's CEO since 2011 and as chairman of the board since 2016. He has 2 decades of senior international management experience in technology systems integration, energy management, and communications and renewable energy. So my first question is, how would you describe BEEM to someone who has never heard of it before?
Well, first of all, Emma, before I do that, just let me thank you very much for having me here and allowing me this opportunity to speak to you and to your colleagues and to the broader audience. I'm a big fan of what CUSWF does, and I'm happy to contribute in any way that I can to it. And I can't think of anything more important to be talking about than sustainability and the implications of that from an economic, geopolitical, and environmental point of view. It's we should all be talking about it. We should be talking about it a lot more, even though it does appear to be getting a bit more press right now because of the sort of current global conditions. Still, not nearly enough is being done about it. And obviously, anytime you want something to get done, the way to start is to talk about it first. So I mean, this is really worthy. On the description of BEEM, I'll give you the sort of wordy public company description, and then I'll translate that into English that the rest of us might enjoy a little bit more. But we are a San Diego-based sustainable technology innovation company. So we actually invent, design, engineer, and then unusually, particularly for Southern California, actually manufacture those products that we've invented, designed, and engineered. And they're all highly innovative, and they're all directed at the nexus of clean energy and transportation. So we're very much convinced that all of transportation will electrify, starting with terrestrial transportation, but certainly also aviation and the maritime industry will go that way. The important question, and that's really good because it's certainly much better to operate vehicles using electricity than it is to use burning oil, for example, which has been the model for the last 130 years. But the big question is also, of course, if we're going to use electricity as fuel, the fuel of the future, where is that electricity going to come from? And so there are certain things that are very important about that. It's important that we have enough of it because we all move around a lot, and there are more and more of us. And in fact, as access to transportation democratizes, we should expect that more and more people are going to move around than at any time in humanity's history. So we're going to need enough electricity for the fuel for that. It's important that it's highly reliable. We can't have it, shutting off for days on end or even hours on end because it's we're all going to rely on it for transportation. And then it's also important that it is, in fact, as clean and environmentally sustainable as possible. What we don't want to do, of course, is move from oil-fired vehicles to coal-fired vehicles, which is what electric vehicles are if they're operating on electricity generated by coal, but the burning of coal. Of course, the ultimate promise of electric vehicles is that we have them all operating on renewable energy. And to the extent that we're able to do that, and the technology exists to do that, and that's what we do for a living, that's obviously going to be a much more sustainable and frankly a more fun and better economic model as well. So that's what we focus on. We invent and design and engineer and actually manufacture products that allow people to drive on sunshine and also to some extent light wind.
That's such an amazing way of describing it, driving on sunshine.
It's fun. I've been doing it myself for a decade now. You know, I always tell people, never eat in a restaurant where the chef is skinny, because he or she are clearly not eating their own product. I am the fat chef of driving on sunshine, right? I mean, I live by my and use my own products every day.
That's amazing. I mean, you describe it in such a way that you can tell you're so passionate about it, just like we all should be. I mean, sustainability is such a massive issue nowadays, and everything that you're saying is so inspiring.
Well, 12 years ago, when I first got involved with this company, I had just come back from the Middle East, spent several years over them in the Middle East doing some things that we can talk about in another conversation. But suffice it to say things that I won't repeat. And I was lucky in that I was not spoiled for choice in terms of the things that I could do. But I was determined to try to find something that would be as impactful as possible. You know, I think that's a decision that all of us can make in life, right? You can either chase material things and money, and I certainly could have earned a lot more money during the last decade if I hadn't been at this company. Although I intend to change that. That's part of growing a public company. But I was chiefly interested in doing something which I consider to be very impactful, because at the end of the day, you know, when you're lying on your deathbed, most people don't sit there counting their money. They look back on their lives and they wonder if they've had any impact in a positive or negative way. And I wanted to make sure that I've had a really, really positive impact. Even, by the way, if I don't win the war, it's important to me to fight on the right side and win the battles that I'm involved in. So looking at what we do now, the generation of electricity and transportation in combination produce about 65% of US greenhouse gas emissions. And by the way, that's a number that translates quite well globally as well. So when you're looking at an opportunity to create products which wipe out 2/3 of a vast polluting nation like this, greenhouse gas emissions every time they're used, it's very, very hard. In fact, I didn't find anything else that I could look at that would be more impactful. And I looked at lots of things. I like waste to energy, for example, converting garbage into electricity is a good idea. I like tide. I like wave. I like a lot of different things, but there was just nothing out there that I could find which was going to be as impactful as attacking these two sources, generation of electricity and transportation. Because, as I say, in combination, right off the bat, you've taken out 2/3 of the greenhouse gas contributions, and like it or not, greenhouse gas emissions are a very serious problem for us right now. And then beyond that, if you look at the history of the United States, we have sent trillions of dollars and lots of young people and lots of treasure and material into parts of the world that we would not otherwise visit. Were it not for our desperate need to guard our access to oil, and to more than just oil, low and stable oil prices. I mean, it is a fact that we put our young people at risk, not just to guard our access to oil, but in fact to guard our access to low and stable oil prices. And so, I'm in an industry now where, having witnessed some of that sort of thing, I'm in an industry now where I'm not only taking care of environmental impact from the greenhouse gas emission point of view, but from an economic and geopolitical point of view, getting us more energy security and doing it in a way that doesn't involve us having to cross borders or make Faustian pacts with regimes with whom we might not otherwise be friends, were it not for the fact that they have black stuff. It's, as I said, very hard to find anything more impactful than that. So you're right to observe that I am passionate about it. Very passionate about it.
That's amazing. I think we don't often think about the true impact that sustainability has. Like you're saying, sending people overseas and the geopolitical impact that just trying to make a better Earth has. So that's an amazing point to bring up. So what really, because you talked about how you used to be in something different. I know that this was your first venture in clean tech, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Did you have like an epiphany moment where you were like, I want to go into sustainability, I want to make a better world? Or was it just sort of something you've been thinking about for a long time?
So I wish I could claim that actually, because my story is more sinister than that. I was brought up to believe in conservation, although we had a different point of view about conservation when I'm from Scotland originally, and I was brought up in a bucolic, indeed idyllic environment in a small village in Scotland. The house I lived in, a church, a castle, and then a little school that had 19 pupils in it, 18 if you took me away. In my early youth. It's such a beautiful place, in fact, that we worked very hard to make sure that it stayed that way. There were always people, of course, who wanted to come in and develop and destroy and pollute the rivers and do all sorts of other things like that. And we were quite willing to fight physically if we needed to look after that sort of stuff. So I suppose you could say that from a very early age, although there was really no discussion about sort of global ramifications to the environment, at least not to where we were exposed to it. In a hyper-local sense, we were, taught to care about things, care about wild animals and care about trees and plants and, all sorts of other stuff. I mean, to give you an example, there was a bank of sand that was on the side of what we in Scotland call a burn, a small river, a creek, you Americans would say, and that bank of sand was full of house martins' nests, which is a small bird like a swallow, based in the swallow family. And needless to say, sand has a value. It wasn't surprisingly that somebody came along after a while and wanted to dig up all the sand and take it away and use it and sell it. And we fought vigorously to prevent them from doing that because we cared about the house martins. And we didn't want them to lose where they live. So that was the sort of very early age exposure to this idea of conserving stuff. And also growing up in Scotland, we were exposed to history and all sorts of other things. And the value of things, the real value of things, not the cost of things, the value of things. And I think, we're living in a society nowadays where people know what the cost of everything is, but they're not sure what the value of anything is. And that's something that needs to be addressed. So you'd think with that background that I'd have had a sort of a life full of, being responsible about these things. But in fact, in my early business years, you could refer to me as a sort of corporate polluting arsehole, because indeed I was one. And then I also, worse than that, helped other people who were much worse than I was, and even did things to help them maintain their power positions and all that sort of stuff, none of which I think is all that good. And so, as I say, it's worse than having the epiphany moment, because if I'd just gone through life in ignorance and then suddenly woken up one day, you could forgive me for that. But in fact, I didn't. I was fully aware of what I was up to, and did it anyway, which is much less forgivable. Nevertheless, there's always time for redemption as long as you do the right things, I suppose. And so now I'm 100% committed. I do, walk the walk as well as talking the talk in my own life. I only drive electric vehicles. I don't eat red meat. For a whole host of different reasons, the moral ones, certainly killing for convenience, I'm not a fan of anymore, but also just the horrible environmental impact of it. And then, from my own energy habits, I'm careful about everything. I turn lights off. I have a net positive household. Unfortunately, because I can afford to do that. So yeah, it's been a long and winding road, but the rest of what I'm committed to now, no one can alter their past, right? Your past is those are cards that have already been dealt to you, but you can definitely impact your future, and that's a responsibility that all of us have. And by the way, not just on an individual level, I think on a nationwide level as well. I think this plays into and it's a different subject entirely, but it does play into this idea that somehow the Western and developed nations now ought to allow the developing world to continue polluting for the next 30 or 40 years, because of course we all got rich polluting, so why shouldn't they? And the simple answer to that is because they know better, and we didn't. And so now it's our responsibility to make sure that they don't do that and to help them. The right idea is not to say go ahead and pollute because we did. The right idea is to say, yes, you're right, we got rich off polluting. Now we're going to invest some of those riches in making sure that you don't make the same stupid mistakes that we made. But then again, we didn't know. In Victorian times, no one had the faintest idea that they were harming things by digging up coal. In fact, on the contrary, they viewed it as a way of dramatically improving people's lives, and it did. Industrialization and all these things. The leisure period there was no such thing as leisure prior to the Victorians. There was no such thing as rest or kind of healthcare that they brought in. None of these things existed until industrialization, and all of it came on the back of pollution and burning fossil fuels. Well, okay, we didn't know any better. Now we do. We have alternatives, and we should bloody well make sure we use them and help everybody else to use them as well.
Yeah, it's so inspiring. So do you tend to focus on the short-term or the long-term environmental impacts of switching to sustainable transportation? So like maybe the next 100 years, or are you thinking about the next like 500 years, the next 1,000 years?
I'm thinking about next year. No, I mean, seriously, the simple fact is, look, first of all, I run a publicly traded company. And when you run a publicly traded company, you are forced to have, to some extent, short-term thinking. And this is not the same thing that you're talking about, by the way, but Wall Street is very unforgiving of a bad quarter. And so we're constantly measured by what we did in any given quarter, and we could have a fantastic quarter. If the next one fails, then believe me, no one will remember that we did well during a quarter. And I would say that I'm a potentially quite unpopular and certainly very unusual CEO of a public company, and that I do tend to take a longer term view. I think one of the things that's terribly lacking in society today is courage in leadership. In politics, it's extinct, and in business, it's on the endangered species list. I will not allow myself to lack it. However uncomfortable something is to approach, or however risky it might be for me personally, I just can't stomach being a coward. And especially not where leadership is concerned. And I'm someone with a fair amount of influence. A lot of people rely on me for their jobs and for their investments and for other things. And I will not be cowardly about the way I husband that responsibility, even though it's often, I take a lot of flack for it. But so sometimes I take a longer term view than many people would like me to. That's business. That means, building a long-term value proposition rather than just taking short-term profits because it looks good on your ticker symbol. Where the environment is concerned, of course, 500 years matters. Everything matters. The next second from now matters. 1,000, a millennia from now matters. Especially to the extent that anything that we're doing today could impact it. I mean, do any one of us want our legacy to be that we left the place that was gifted to us worse than we found it? I hope that nobody listening to this would go to a friend's house and trash it and then leave, but that's what we're doing, all of us, when we abuse this sort of shining orb upon which we all live, particularly when we do it for comfort or complacency or worse, greed. Any of the three of them. So I think every minute from now is important. As far as the strategy for how to deal with that, you have to be pragmatic. You have to be very pragmatic about it. I mean, look, even doing what I do today, I'm involved in industries which are extractive and destructive. You can't make the products that I make, which generate and store their own electricity, without having energy storage, without having solar modules, without having steel, without having aluminium, paint, copper. All of these things are derived from extractive industries. Famously, at the moment, where batteries are concerned, there's a high cobalt content in batteries, and much of that cobalt's coming from the Congo, and a great deal of it mined in ways that would, shock and embarrass all of us if we had our noses rubbed in it. But it's far enough away, and so whatever, we can sort of ignore it. I won't ignore it. So then, how can I justify doing it? Well, it's simple. There's a couple of things. The first one is, because while we are mining cobalt out of Congo in extractive and ridiculous ways, we're also taking oil out of Nigeria, Venezuela, the Middle East, and in all sorts of other places, which, you don't even have to go that far. Go up to Canada and look at the tar sands up there. Look at the way oil is being extracted up there. Look at fracking here. Look at all the other things that we're doing. The simple fact of the matter is all of these things are very destructive. The difference, of course, between mining cobalt and nickel and lithium and those other things is that those are one-off events, as damaging as they are. But more importantly, they are moving us towards a future where we don't need to do these sorts of things. Oil doesn't do that. It just doesn't matter how much of the stuff you burn, you don't need any less of it, right? Whereas with these other extractive industries, there's a very good chance that we can get ourselves to the point, frankly, where it's pretty much circular. Lithium-ion batteries, for example, that we use in sort of electric vehicles, 98% recyclable. We'll get to a point where our reliance on extraction is so small that it's almost meaningless, and of course well regulated, and it could be. It can be done without creating harm, certainly not long-term harm. And in fact, if you follow the arithmetic and you look at the fact that although today we have 1.4 billion cars on the world's roads and we're moving to 2 billion in the future, there will come a time when the number of vehicles actually declines. And this will be due to autonomous and shared vehicles. There'll be less of a requirement for individuals to own vehicles because it'll be more of a burden than a benefit. With autonomy and with the shared vehicle environment. And so with that in mind, when you get to 98% recycling, probably 99% as technology advances, and a constant reduction in the number of vehicles on the road, recycling will be able to handle all of it. So we're on the right path. And this is the pragmatism. You can't simply say, I'm going to stop doing anything damaging. Well, it's like fighting a war. Think of it in that sense, right? I mean, nobody thinks that killing is a good idea. But was killing Nazis a good idea? You're damn right it was. I would have pulled the trigger. It's still horrific to kill a human and to end somebody's life and to cause damage of that sort and to bomb cities and to do all these other things. But we needed to win the Second World War. Otherwise, we'd have been living in a very different world than we're living in it today. Is it right to fight the Russians in the Ukraine? Yes, it is. It's killing, it's disgusting, it's somebody's son, somebody's daughter who you're blowing to pieces. And those things are all very difficult to deal with, but you have to do the right things and be pragmatic about them. And so I would say the answer to your question in terms of the long-term, short-term thing is there's going to be some bumps in the road. You know, this is not going to be an easy transition. It's not going to be painless. But the key thing is we all need to be focusing on getting to the right place instead of just saying, I don't care if what I'm doing is continuing to damage, in fact, maybe even making things worse, as long as I'm getting mine. No. That's not good enough. We all need to be fighting in the right direction. And, you know, it was Clint Eastwood that said during one of his movies, sometimes a man's got to disturb the peace to keep the peace. And there's a good deal of truth in that.
So it sounds like what would kind of be your dream goal is to have everything be as close to 100% recyclable and reusable as possible.
Of course. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right? That is sustainability. It's not sustainable, even if there's just a minor drag on finite resources. It's not sustainable. It may be more sustainable or sustainable for longer or something, but it is not, in fact, sustainable with a full stop at the end of that word, because there's some, diminishment that's going on there. But again, the point to make is that it's very important that we don't get hung up on the sort of headline short-term negative impacts, as long as those things are moving us in the right direction. So again, going back to mining, the United States has very, very large lithium reserves. The United States also has the fourth largest reserves of cobalt. We don't need to be going to Congo for cobalt. We have them here in the United States. We have it here in the United States. Manganese and nickel, which are the other important components for lithium-ion batteries. I'm concentrating on batteries because they're the ones that that's what gets most of the press. These things are readily available within what I'll call friendly Western democracies. In other words, we do not need to be enriching regimes that do not share our ideals to get our hands on any of these things, as we have been, by the way, for the last 130 years where oil is concerned, particularly the post-Second World War years. We have been enriching regimes that we would not otherwise, that don't share our ideals. I mean, obviously, Saudi Arabia is a very good example of this. You're the China-US Women's Foundation. None of you could vote in Saudi Arabia. When I was there, none of you could drive. None of you could be seen in restaurants where men were. I didn't see any women there while I was there at all, except cloaked completely from head to toe in black. I saw 14-year-old boys driving women around because they weren't allowed to drive the cars themselves. I mean, and yet this is our great ally in the region, at the time, fourth largest military budget in the world. All of that money coming out of American gas tax. You know, you got to ask yourself, you kick the British out because you don't like a monarchy. And you don't like taxation without representation and everything like that, but your largest ally in the Middle East is an absolute monarchy that has nowhere near the democratic freedoms that the British did, even back then, hundreds of years ago when you threw us out. So, you know, there's something not right here, okay? I find it shocking, frankly, that in California we have banned offshore oil drilling. And people who know what I do for a living will be amazed to hear me say that. Why would someone who's involved in my industry think it's shocking that we banned offshore oil drilling? Well, because we're importing oil from Nigeria. We want to go back to Venezuela and get it. We've been, you know, the Russians and I mean, you know, and the Middle East and all that sort of stuff. Surely, if you're going to do something like that, you should do it in your own backyard where you can regulate it and where you can make sure that it's being done in a way which doesn't hurt people or the environment. And we could in California, we could, I mean, it's never going to be safe, but we could do it a hell of a lot better. This idea that somehow it's because it's not happening where we are and where we can see it, it's okay. That to me, again, is a lack of courage. I don't support it at all. So yes, get to recycling as much as we can. But the first steps that we need to take is we need to get our hands dirty. And we need to stop saying that because we're richer than everybody else, we can throw all the dirty stuff into their back garden as long as our back garden looks nice and smells nice. That's an appalling idea. It's appalling from a courage point of view, but it's also appalling because of the points I just made. If we brought cobalt mining here and lithium extraction here, and we are, by the way, on lithium, we're doing it, cobalt now. But if we did all of that and we did it in a highly regulated environment, would the price of batteries go up a little bit? Yes, they would in the short run. I would use government to help with that process. But my fervent belief is that actually once we onshore all of this stuff, because of the fantastic innovation in American industry and American thinking, we would soon figure out ways to make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And then we would not have the Pacific Ocean between us and the source, or the Atlantic Ocean between us and the source, or the Indian and Atlantic Ocean between us and the source. And so we would cut out all of the cost of shipping, and we would also cut out all of the environmental impact of shipping, and we'd have a homegrown and highly defendable and secure and sustainable source of these things that we need. But the only way we're going to get there is if we get over our silly ideas about NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and also allowing the words of a small minority of people to prevent things which are a tremendous benefit to the great majority. And I'm not for mob rule, by the way, but sometimes you've got to say, listen, I'm sorry you don't want this view from your back window, but we need to stop wrecking the planet. You know, I totally get you don't want the view wrecked, but we need to start wrecking the planet here. So we're gonna have to take some grown-up steps to do the right things. It's going to require work and effort, like all good things do, and courage, like all good things do. What it won't be moved by is complacency, sticking your head in the sand and saying, oh, well, as long as I can't see it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's such a common thing, especially with sort of performative activism in the US. I mean, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist, but then it's still harming you, it's still there, it's still causing a massive impact to you, even if it's so far away. So
well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And what's interesting is there's a great deal of energy in the US, and especially amongst you lot, Gen Zers, right? There's a great deal of energy. People are very enthusiastic about things and feel very strongly about things. What I would ask your audience to do is to make sure you're firing at worthy targets. Anyone can become upset or offended or active about things which are easy to bite and chew, and especially if they're part of the zeitgeist. I ask you, don't do that. Don't waste your energy on these things, okay? Seek out the hard things. Seek out the big things. Seek out the truly impactful things. Ask yourself, when you're doing something, will anyone give a shit in 100 years? And also ask yourself, are you doing it for you, to make you feel better? Or are you doing it because it is actually the right thing to do and it will actually be impactful in a big and long-term way? And be honest, look in the mirror. Don't jump on bandwagons and don't expend a lot of energy into things that just because they are the current de rigueur matter to be excited or upset about. It doesn't take very much walking through history to see all the things, that nonsense things that people have been upset about, and to realize that that is indeed all they were, nonsense. It also doesn't take much of a walk through history to be able to say, to identify all the things that really mattered and be shocked and horrified by how few people really did anything about it.
That's very true. I think it's an amazing point to say that you need to go for the harder things that are going to take more effort and more group effort and work together rather than the simple things. Because you got to get going on the hard stuff. That's going to take the longest. That's going to take the most group effort. And we all really need to just work together to try to change things for the better.
Yeah.
So you're talking
screaming and shouting at each other on social media, or any kind of media for that matter, probably feels good, but it's not really going to get anything done. You actually need to get engaged and do something. Otherwise, nothing will change.
So I wanted to ask, what do you personally think is the most impactful change that BEEM has made so far?
Well, it is simply driving on sunshine. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, we've millions and millions and millions of miles now that people have driven with essentially zero environmental impact and with no economic impact and with no economic to the stability of the US grid. There's no question about that. Closely following that is that we are now, I've been doing this for a dozen years, and that's, by the way, about 8 or 9 years longer than I thought I was going to be doing. I really thought I'd turn this company much faster than I did, but some of the electrification of transportation didn't happen as quickly as I thought it was going to. I'm a combination of optimism and paranoia. And those are vital attributes in somebody who does what I do for a living. The optimism part that will never die. And sometimes I see things, and when it's so obvious that it's the right thing to do, I just can't believe it doesn't happen a lot faster than it does. I expect it to, but it very often doesn't, because human beings take a long time to change their habits and get used to new things and new ideas. Oddly, human beings. One of the things that characteristics we all have in common is we will continue doing things which are uncomfortable and bad for us as long as we're used to them, even when confronted with an option which is more comfortable and good for us. We'll still keep doing the bad stuff. It's just amazing, and so that takes a long while for people to get over that. We say a fair amount of that. But I would say the other thing that we've done is that we have just now, particularly in the last couple of years, we have become so accepted as a solution, one solution, not the solution, but one solution for what we're doing, energizing the electrification of transportation, that we've really opened an awful lot of people's eyes to the possibility. And sometimes that is actually more impactful than the practical pursuit. Because what ends up happening is when you can open a large number of people's eyes to the possibility, all of a sudden they start doing the same things that you're doing, right? You're never going to get it all done yourself. But if you can show other people that in fact it's possible, not just possible, but really good, then you see people jumping on the bandwagon. So to give you a couple of examples of that, for the last 10 years, I've been preaching the same old stuff. Okay, got to get off oil, we've got to electrify. But there isn't enough electricity. The grid was never designed to supply enough electricity for transportation. If you think about that, when they built the electric grid, no one ever said, oh, let's make sure it has enough capacity to replace oil as our fuel source for everything. Right? That was never even considered. And so the grid was built without that kind of capacity in mind, and it's very difficult to change that. I've been preaching about the vulnerability of the grid. What happens if we have a blackout or a brownout when we're all relying on electricity to fuel all our vehicles? I mean, that's a catastrophe that we just cannot support, right? We know the Russians have hacked into the grid. We know the Chinese have hacked into the grid. Even though we're part of the Chinese-US Women's Foundation, we still have to accept it. We know the Iranians have hacked into the grid. We know that various homegrown and foreign terrorist organizations of crackpots would like to bring the grid down. And of course they would, because it turns out you don't need to bomb this country into submission. You just turn the power off for a few months and it would be much more impactful, particularly when we're relying on it for fuel. So I've been harping on about all these things for a decade, in fact, longer than a decade. And for about the first 8 or 9 years, I got a lot of eye rolling, a lot of polite coughing, and oh God, he's at it again. The nutter's up on the stage barking on about all these things. What's he talking about? I can tell you that in the last 2 years, they say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. Many of those people that used to roll their eyes at me are now speaking publicly using the very same terms. In Washington, D.C. now, where 2 years ago I probably couldn't get a junior staffer to take a meeting with me. Now I meet with senators in the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy. Yeah, it's just people are starting to wake up And so even if we had done nothing else than just opening people's eyes to these conditions, these eventualities, these certainties, that in itself would be a very powerful legacy, in my view. The good news is we get to do both. We get to bring people's attention to it and also play some role, however small, doesn't matter. That goes back to even if you don't win the war, it doesn't matter, fight on the right side and win the battles that you're involved with. But we play some role, however small, in actually fixing some of this stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I mean, I'm sure you have to meet with lawmakers so often, and when you do, you must have to talk a great deal about money, since that's what most people really care about. So what do you think are the biggest positive impacts economically about switching to electric transportation? Like, what do you say to lawmakers when you're trying to pitch this?
Yeah, look, it's a great story. It is a great story, and there's a great deal of misinformation out there about it right now. Not surprisingly, because there are powerful entrenched incumbents that would be very happy if this never happened, right? So it's easy to sound very sensible and make all sorts of terribly sensible sounding comments. Electric vehicles are too expensive. You know, they're the domain of rich elite people. They won't do anything to fix the environment. Batteries are more damaging than oil. Most of these things are the worst kind of lies, because there's some element to truth to them. And brazen outright lies are usually fairly easy to uncover and to point out to even the uninitiated that they're lacking veracity. The sudden little bit of truth lies are the worst. So let's talk about the cost of electric vehicles for a second. We hear this all the time. Electric vehicles are too expensive and people can't afford them. Well, what people mean by that is that the sticker price for a comparably equipped electric vehicle is today still, although parity is coming. We're very close to it. But for a comparably equipped electric vehicle, today the sticker price for electric vehicles is just a little bit higher than its internal combustion engine brethren. Now, the simple fact is that people are not very good at following money and understanding the whole thing. So consumers, for example, have a tendency to look at sticker price. They don't really look at total cost of ownership. If they did, they would quickly figure out that the average American spends something in the order of $5,000 a year on gasoline, diesel, or maintenance for their internal combustion engine vehicles. So if an electric car costs $5,000 more than the comparably equipped diesel or gasoline vehicle, no maintenance, essentially no maintenance, no meaningful maintenance. And if you're driving on sunshine, like I do, no fuel costs at all, no unit cost for energy at all. So every year I drive an electric vehicle, that's $5,000 I get back. So if the one I bought was $5,000 more than the comparably equipped petrol one, after year one, we're par. Year two, I just got a check for $5,000. Year three, another, and it becomes a money printing machine. In fact, I refer to my electric vehicle not as my EV, but as my free V. Because when compared to the expensive German cars I used to drive, it's like driving a free vehicle. It's absolutely unbelievable. Now, I'm affluent, and so I can afford that initial sticker price. I get that, and I understand that does not describe the general population. However, it actually gets much worse the poorer you are. Poor people that live in disadvantaged communities spend a far greater proportion of their so-called disposable income on transportation. And in the United States, it's not disposable income because there isn't any public transportation option. It's not, you can't call something disposable income when it is essential to your livelihood and to your life, right? That's not, I don't view that as disposable. Disposable income to me is stuff you spend on popcorn at the movies and things like that, right? It's not your ability to live and feed your children and all these other things. So if you're poor, several things will become immediately apparent. First of all, you likely drive an older vehicle. It's almost certainly less fuel efficient. It almost certainly pollutes more, and it almost certainly requires a lot more maintenance. So you're just getting hit from every angle. You're paying more for gas than rich people because your vehicle's less fuel efficient. You have much more to spend on maintenance because your vehicle's clapped out and it's breaking down all the time. And on top of everything else, you get to live in the most polluted parts of the country. And that, by the way, don't have to take my word for it. The air maps will show you that all day long, every day. The more disadvantaged the community, the more polluted the air is. And it's not all because of the vehicles. A lot of it's because, of course, it's just like we don't want to do offshore drilling off Santa Barbara, where it's nice and pretty. We don't like putting industry and polluting stuff in rich people's neighborhoods. We put it in poor people's neighborhoods, right? So all of those things are very, very damaging if you're economically disadvantaged. Put the same person in an electric vehicle. Give them renewable energy to fuel that vehicle and just consider the implications of this. Now, all of a sudden, talk about democracy, talk about democratizing the access to transportation and to clean energy. Talk about taking away a $5,000 a year or more because you're driving a less efficient vehicle and with more maintenance, after tax burden from somebody that's earning less than 30 grand a year, has got a couple of kids, and they're going to spend $5,000 or $6,000 a year just pouring fumes out of a tailpipe. I mean, it's really shocking. Whereas we can fix that, put them in an electric vehicle, give them renewable energy, and all of a sudden we've lifted that burden off them. They're not going to be late for the job interview. They're not going to have difficulty getting the kids to school, and they're going to have $5,000 or $6,000 a year after tax money back in their pockets, which they can spend in the local community, which is what most people do, by the way. If you give people tax breaks or whatever else, they tend to spend the money, not save it, and it tends to go right back into the local community, local and businesses. What does that do? Well, that creates economic vigor. More jobs, more money for everybody. It's really not that difficult. In fact, there's an argument, and I've done it back in the napkin on this, and I've showed it to some of my friends in Washington, DC. You know how roads are free, right? I mean, you don't have to pay when you drive down the road, unless you're on a toll road. You don't have to pay when you go down the road, but you're using it. You don't pay when you go over a bridge. You don't pay for traffic lights. You don't pay for street lights. All of that infrastructure is all free, right? I mean, it isn't. You pay for your tax dollars. But there's not a per transaction use fee for any of those things, okay? Why does it stop at roads, bridges, traffic lights, and street lamps and all these other things like that? What if we said vehicles and fuel infrastructure? But so actually, just taking a step back, why is it a good idea to do that from a tax point of view? Well, because we know that if we provide people with bridges, roads, and lights and all that sort of stuff, they move around, and that generates commerce. Commerce generates wealth, wealth generates taxes and allows us to pay for the bridges and the roads and all these other things like this. It's not benevolence. Somebody didn't just wake up one morning and say, I think it's a right for human beings to have roads, right? They recognize that the more development, investment there was in that type of infrastructure, the stronger and more powerful the economy would become. And that's why we do it. So here's an interesting idea. Why stop at roads? Why not just say moving around is essential infrastructure? We can't live without it. Okay, and so in the world according to Desmond, crackpot place that would be, but anyway, in the world according to Desmond, so your roads, your bridges, your lights, your traffic lights, and all these other things are free. And by the way, so is your means of transportation, as long as it's clean and green and it's not harming things, and we don't have to go overseas and do all these other horrible extractive things. Now all of a sudden you've got people with total freedom to move around, total freedom to conduct business and to energize commerce and everything else like that without the burdens associated with transportation, or the pollution or anything else like that. The back of the napkin says that the tax receipts from that would far outweigh the investment any day of the week. And God knows it'd be a hell of a lot better world for everybody to live in, because you would not be sentenced to a life of ongoing hardship and poverty because you can never break out of that trap of pouring everything that you earn into your car so that you can go and earn some more money so you can pour it all into your car, which many people do. Many people live, work so that they can afford to get to work. We could fix that. I'd have to be very careful about how I did that, because it's important to point out I'm a markets guy. I don't want to live in a socialist utopia, but I'm also a pragmatist. And if I recognize that infrastructure equals commerce, equals wealth, equals economic activity, tax receipts, and everything else, then I'm going to say, well, where am I going to draw the line on infrastructure? And there may be a more pragmatic and more intelligent solution than simply saying, well, we'll stop at streets and everything else is your problem. That's going to take a while for us all to think about that one. Yeah. We really might have to sit around in a circle for a couple hours and really think that one through, but I can tell you the arithmetic works.
Oh, you're talking about how we need to work together to make a change and how we need to think in different ways than we've sort of been geared to.
Yes.
For everyone out there who wants to make a change in the world, where should they start? Like, what do you think is the first step for someone, say in Gen Z, who just wants to do what you're doing?
Well, obviously, the place that everyone has to start with any beneficial change is in the mirror, right? I mean, that goes without saying, but I know that's a cliche, and I don't want to sound smug. I mean, I think the first thing you got to ask yourself is, when you say you want to create change for the positive and all that sort of stuff, what do you mean by it? What's your target? frankly. And I have my set of targets, and they're very important to me. And I happen to believe, as I said to you, that they're pretty much the lowest hanging fruit out there, because I think a lot of other things get solved. I mean, look, you guys are a part of a women's foundation. If you look at all the economies around the world that rely almost entirely on extractive resources and essentially rentier type environments, most of them have the most appalling standards where equality for the 51% is concerned, women. Almost all of them do. And part of the reason for that is because when you don't have to really operate in a competitive environment, you don't need 51% of your intellectual power. And also, it historically has benefited men who can just sort of take money for extractive industries and use that money to suppress everybody else in society. And there is no more oppressed or suppressed group in the world than women. I mean, it's we're like picking and choosing our ethnicities and all that sort of stuff. But the simple fact of the matter, you don't need to do that. I don't care what color you are. If you're a female, you're at a disadvantage on the planet everywhere. That's another reason really to tackle this whole, the whole waste and pollution and that sort of stuff, is because also the geopolitical impacts, the economic impacts are actually also very much outweighed against women across the world. But back to your question about what can we all do to change this. I think the first thing you've got to do is pick your targets. And then you've got to ask yourself how prepared you are to go after them. And as I've already said, be very, very careful about getting too excited about the zeitgeist, about whatever it is that happens to be, in the headlines today. Many of those things are important. Many of those things are overblown. What's going to be really important is for you to find areas where you can be hyper impactful, and that will, as I say, have large and long-lasting impact. And that might be all the way just from how you lead your own life. Obviously, what do you do do you recycle? Do you select, products which are less negatively impactful? Do you waste less? All of those things. The great thing about compounding is that when you're heading towards 8 billion human beings, if each one of them just does something slightly better than they did yesterday every day, it won't take long for there to be massive change. I used to lead a youth group. And I used to tell them, here's the only thing you need to know about life. Leave everything, everybody, and everywhere just a tiny bit better than you found it. Everything, everybody, and everywhere just a tiny bit better than you found it. Because again, compounding, right? The next person comes along after you and does the same thing and so on. And before you know, 8 billion people are doing that. And the world's problems are solved in about 25 minutes because of the power of compounding. So yeah, look, I like making money. I'm not telling anybody that's listening to this they shouldn't make money. I'm saying try and make money in a way, as you, a Gen Z, you're going through your education and all that sort of stuff. Try and seek out things where you can do good and make money at the same time. And if you have to pick one or other, do good. Try and make an impact. Certainly make sure you don't leave things worse than you found them on any level at all. And yeah, pick your targets and then go after them. It's amazing how much power you have when you're young. It's amazing how much power you have, and not by shouting and screaming and drawing attention to yourself. Although those things are important too sometimes. I mean, if you're passionate about something and you want to go out and protest or whatever else, I'm all for that. But at the end of the day, there needs to be solid backup for these things first, behind that, right? It's no good in shouting and screaming about stuff if you're not prepared to go and do the hard work. Get your hands dirty. Break a nail, don't be too fragile either, because as I've also said a good deal during this call, there's going to be a lot of hard work. You're going to end up having to make pragmatic choices. Things will sometimes be difficult. Fragility will not get you there. You need to be strong, have some courage, and be innovative, and be prepared to take it on.
So my last question is geared towards the people like me who are close to entering the workforce and really want to try and make a change and are passionate about what they want to do. What would you suggest are the jobs that will provide us with the careers that will also help us fix the planet in the process?
Yeah. And it's not. I don't think it's obvious or at least as obvious as it might sound. I mean, clearly, if you select to go into some kind of sustainable industry, whether it's renewable energy or electrification of transportation, these are things that I'm involved with. But there's lots of other sustainable industries out there, which you can spend some time identifying, making sure that in fact they are sustainable and not just clever at positioning themselves or making themselves seem that way. Believe me, there's a great deal of money being invested in that right now. There's this ESG investing movement, and there's an awful lot of companies who rank very highly from ESG score, but frankly, are still damaging their local environment and broader environment and the planet or people or whatever else. So you'll be very careful that whatever you do doesn't just have a sticker on it. But as far as the jobs are concerned, I mean, you already know I like influence. I like being involved in something that's going to multiply up my actions. And so I think what you want to do is you want to choose any area that you can get involved in where you think that you can have an outsized impact. And that could be law. It doesn't have to be making things or tearing things down. I think one of the areas that's going to be very, very exciting in the not too distant future is I think that some people are going to start going after people who have made a great deal of money polluting, and they're going to figure out how to extract money from them. And I think, that's great as long as that money's put to good work. If it just enriches the lawyer that figured it out, that would be a tragedy. But you can see, you can pick your polluting industry. We know that most of them are aware of the fact that they've been doing it since the 70s at least, and yet they've continued to take profit over making the right decisions. So after a while, there's lots of other instances where the law has evolved to a point where, people have liability for their actions that they didn't have 20, 30, 40, or certainly not 50 or 60 years ago. I can see that happening in the future. So what a fantastically exciting job that would be, if law was an area of interest. People give lawyers a bad rap. I don't. I like lawyers. Lawyers are, the law is the fabric that holds society together, and the lawyers are the ones whose job it is to make sure it's all working for us. When you say you don't like lawyers, what you really mean is people who hire them for frivolous or useless reasons, and rely on their greed to go after those things. But to get into that kind of law would be a very interesting thing to do. Business, of course, if you're going to get into business, then just make sure that you're pursuing profits in a way that will actually, again, leave everybody, everything, and everywhere a little bit better than you found it, or be an innovator. I was in India a couple of years ago with Rick Perry, who was at that time George Bush's energy secretary, and I won't tell you what I think about that choice or anything else, but in a meeting, there was a lot of talk about selling the Indians American gas and oil as a means to try to correct the trade imbalance with India. At that time, we had about an $80 billion trade imbalance with India, which is just utter nonsense. Clearly not understanding the economics. There's nothing wrong with that imbalance. In fact, we probably should have been higher. But at any rate, the idea was we'll sell you oil and gas because somehow this will correct this imbalance. And I made myself very unpopular on that trip because I was with a bunch of oil and gas guys, and there I was, the lone voice, saying that wasn't the way I thought the Indians could do better than to do this. But I also said to Secretary Perry that, with all due respect, that while he was busily trying to sell the mineral resources that are under our feet, that my feeling was that the greatest resource that the United States has to offer is between the ears of its citizens. And that instead of trying to sell the dead dinosaurs and plants underneath our soil, what he should be doing is investing in that resource, what's between the ears of our citizens, and in their incredibly innovative capabilities. Combine that with the world's most efficient capital markets, which the United States have, and the right kind of help from the government, you've got a force to be reckoned with. And instead of exporting oil and gas to the Indians, what we should have been doing is exporting technologies to them, which would allow them not to rely on oil and gas. And we'd make a lot more than $80 billion a year doing that. And it would be a lot better for everything and everybody involved if we got along with that. So I think, you look for areas where you can be influential, look for areas you can be innovative, be courageous, do not be fragile, and seek out careers where you can do very well yourself, but not harming others.
Thank you so much. You've been so inspirational, and it's been an honor to speak with you. Leslie, Ella, do you have anything you want to ask?
So it's been a fascinating discussion, and thank you so much to both of you. A quick question. We are the China-US Women's Foundation. Desmond, how can we better collaborate with China in this area? It's so crucial, and yet we seem not to be talking to each other. What do you think?
Well, no, and of course the news has been very bad in the last few days, going the other direction with the what's going on over Taiwan, and the Chinese now no longer wishing to collaborate with the United States on cross-border law, and most alarmingly on climate matters. China's the largest polluter in the world now, with the US closely following it. We used to be. They've taken over. And by the way, remember. Important to remember that one of the reasons that China is the world's largest polluter is because of our insatiable appetite for their throwaway production of products that we just cannot get enough of. I mean, buy it once, throw it in the garbage bin. If you really care about the environment and US-China relations, stop buying that stuff and stop throwing it in the trash. Do without it, or get something that will last a long time. But yes, I think things are moving in the wrong direction at the moment, and that's a tragedy. Leslie, you and I have been to China. Chinese people are not trying to, overthrow the world or kill Americans or anything like that. But there is this tremendous great power standoff that's developing here, alarmingly like, the pre-war years. And I'm talking about the First World War more than the Second World War, actually. I don't know. It's just amazing human capability to build walls and not bridges. But one thing I will say for sure is, if we want anyone in the world, and this is the Chinese or anybody else, to do the right things, we need to do them ourselves first, right? And I think that's very important part of the Inflation Reduction Act, so-called Inflation Reduction Act, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. These things are not perfect. They're not going to solve the world's problems or anything else like that. But what it has done is it's told the world that we will actually put our money where our mouths are. And we'll stop preaching to them about how they need always clean up their act. And maybe we'll start cleaning up our own act first. Let's start a down payment against that. And to me, if you want people to do the right thing, it's simple. Do it yourself. And then you've got a position to, not a bully pulpit, but a pulpit from which you can work to solve things. Obviously, the geopolitical issues going on between China and the United States right now are much bigger than just environmental things. But if we're speaking of that alone, there cannot be any other solution than to start ourselves doing the right thing, and to demonstrate how clearly important it is to us, and that we're prepared to give up almost everything to do the right things. And that, by the way, is a wonderfully American ideal. That's what this nation's based itself on, as being this sort of benevolent power. It saddens me when I see that. I remember as a small boy, anytime there was a famine anywhere, or anytime anything went wrong anywhere, the big American gray ships would show up, and the big, powerful, healthy Americans would come off the ship carrying aid and help and infrastructure and everything else like that. Let's get back to those days where we exert and extend power by doing the right things, not by being insular and combative and shouters.
So yes, you're here. Let's keep an eye on these issues. Thank you again. I hope our audience takes a closer look at BEEM Global. I have followed the progress you've made, and I'm excited that you've moved into battery production. That's a whole new area. So I look forward to further discussions about that. Emma and Ella, thank you for joining us today, and look forward to future conversations with all of you.
Emma, you said it was an honor to talk to me. The honor was mine. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful speaking to you. I hope we can do this again.
So do I. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great night.
Thank you.
You too.